I never thought I'd catch my husband in his old bedroom with his ex-wife undressing on our son's 7th birthday. But let me back up a little. My name's not important, but I'm 27, male, and I've been married to Peter for 3 years. We were together for 6 years before that. He's 37, bisexual, and has an ex-wife named Allison who he divorced about a year before we met. We have a son, Jack, who's 7. We adopted him after we got married, but I've raised him like he's my own from day one. He calls me dad. I love that kid more than anything in the world. The problem is Peter's family. They're pretty homophobic. They've never really accepted our marriage. His mom especially is always making comments about how it's a phase or how Peter should get back with Allison. She's the type who thinks a man needs a woman to be complete. She never misses an opportunity to bring up Allison. And Allison herself, she's always hovering around the edges of Peter's life, texting him, liking his social media posts, showing up at family events even after the divorce. I tried to be okay with it. I told myself it was just co-parenting or whatever. But deep down, I knew something was off. 2 weeks ago, we went to his family's town for Jack's birthday. His parents live about 3 hours away, and we wanted to do a big party with cousins and grandparents. I was excited. Jack was so happy. He kept talking about the cake with the dinosaur theme. We drove down Friday night, and the party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. Saturday morning, I helped set up. Balloons, tables, a bouncy castle in the backyard. Peter's mom was in the kitchen, but she barely looked at me. She was whispering on the phone, but I didn't think much of it. Around noon, guests started arriving. Jack's cousins, a few neighbors, some old friends of the family. Everything seemed normal. Then Allison walked in. She came through the front door like she belonged there. She was carrying a gift bag with a big bow, and she went straight to Jack and said, "Happy birthday, sweetie." Jack looked confused for a second, but he's a polite kid, so he said, "Thank you." I froze. I looked around for Peter, but he wasn't in the room. His mom came over and hugged Allison, all smiles. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Jack and leave, but it was his birthday. I refused to ruin his day, so I swallowed it. I spent the next 2 hours playing with Jack and his cousins. I pushed all the anger down. I kept telling myself it's just a party, I can deal with this later. Around 2, it was time for cake. I went to the kitchen to get it, but Peter's mom said she'd handle it, so I started gathering the kids. Then I noticed Peter and Allison weren't anywhere. I checked the backyard, no sign of them. I checked the living room, nothing. I went upstairs thinking maybe Peter was changing or something. The door to his old bedroom was cracked open. I heard a soft sound. I pushed it open a little more. They were both half undressed. Peter had his shirt off and Allison was unbuttoning hers. They were kissing. I stood there for maybe 3 seconds. It felt like an hour. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned around and walked back downstairs. I went to the kitchen, took the cake from Peter's mom, and helped Jack blow out the candles. I smiled. I sang happy birthday. I opened presents with him. I acted like nothing happened, because what else could I do? Ruin my son's memory of his 7th birthday? No, the party wound down. People started leaving. I saw Peter and Allison come down the stairs looking flushed. Peter came straight over to me. He pulled me aside into the hallway and his face was angry. "Why did you cut the cake without me?" he said. "That was disrespectful. I'm the father. I should have been there." I just stared at him. I was so calm it scared myself. I said, "I'm sorry. I just thought you'd be too busy getting into your ex-wife's pants." He went pale. His mouth opened and closed. I didn't wait for an answer. I took Jack's hand, told him we were leaving, and walked out. I didn't even say goodbye to his parents. I buckled Jack into his car seat and drove straight to the hotel. Jack kept asking why we left. I said Daddy wasn't feeling well. I got him into his pajamas, read him a story, and put him to bed. He fell asleep holding his new dinosaur toy. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. Then my phone started blowing up. Peter. Texts at first. It wasn't what it looked like. She just showed up. I was trying to tell her to leave. Then calls. I ignored them all. I didn't know what to feel. I was numb. The next morning, I checked my phone. 12 missed calls from Peter. A dozen texts, one from his mother. "You overreacted. Allison is family. You need to apologize." That was when everything changed. I started typing a reply, but then I stopped. I realized I didn't owe her anything. I didn't owe Peter anything. I looked at Jack sleeping in the other bed, and I knew what I had to do. I called a divorce lawyer that afternoon. That was the moment my marriage ended. But unfortunately, that wasn't the only outrageous situation I've had to deal with. Let me tell you about what happened at work around the same time. I'm a woman in my late 30s and I've been at this company for over a decade. I used to think I was respected. I worked my way up, managed a team, met every deadline. But then the CEO, let's call him Dick because he is one, decided he wanted a family man as his golden boy. Bob was his name. When Bob had a kid and his wife became a SAHM, Dick practically threw promotions at him. It didn't matter that Bob started showing up later and later, missing whole afternoons, sometimes sleeping at his desk. He was a good dad, so he got rewarded. Meanwhile, I had a baby a few years ago, and what did I get? A silent demotion. No raise in 4 years. Suddenly, I was considered the CEO's mother, the one who handles everything but gets zero credit. I let it slide because I needed the health insurance, and I kept telling myself it would get better. Then Bob got promoted again. This time, he outranked me, and a couple months later, he texts me out of the blue. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the middle of reconciling quarterly expenses, and my phone buzzed. I looked down and saw his name. The message read, Hey, can you house my wife, toddler, and dog for a week in January? I'll be out of town for work and they need somewhere to stay. If that doesn't work, I can ask the company to pay for accommodations instead. I stared at the screen, gobsmacked, absolutely gobsmacked. He's asking me, the person he leapfrogged over, the person who hasn't gotten a raise in 4 years, to host his family for a week. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, but I didn't. I took a breath and typed a polite no. I said I wasn't able to host and I suggested he look into hotels. He didn't reply. I thought that was the end of it. But the next day, Dick calls me into his office. He has this way of smiling that makes my skin crawl. So Bob mentioned you declined to help him out with his family situation, he said, leaning back in his chair. That's not really the team player attitude we value here. Bob's been under a lot of pressure and we need to support each other. I just stared at him. I said, Dick, I haven't had a raise in 4 years. I was demoted after having a baby. Bob got promoted for doing half the work I do. And now he wants me to be his free hotel? I said no, that's my answer. Dick's smile disappeared. He went into a whole speech about loyalty and how I was being difficult and uncooperative. I sat there and took it, but I didn't change my answer. After that meeting, I started updating my resume. I sent out applications that night. The whole thing just confirmed what I already knew. I was never going to be valued there. 2 weeks later, I had a job offer at a smaller company. I put in my notice and Dick had the nerve to look surprised. He asked if there was anything they could do to keep me. I laughed. I said, you had 4 years, and I walked out. That job was a nightmare, but at least I got out before it got worse. I'm still there now and my new boss actually treats me like a human being. But if you think that's bad, let me tell you about another situation I ended up in. This one was with a roommate, a complete stranger who turned into a nightmare. I'm 21, female, and I was sharing a 2-bedroom flat with another girl same age. We split rent evenly, we were friendly but not close. It was fine for about a year. Then she started dating this guy, 24, and everything went downhill. At first he was around once or twice a week. Within a few months he was sleeping over 5 or 6 nights a week. Sometimes he'd stay for 2 weeks straight. He wasn't on the lease. He didn't pay a cent toward rent or utilities. He never brought groceries. He never cleaned, and he showered constantly, twice a day minimum, sometimes more, and every single time he used my stuff. My shampoo, conditioner, face wash, razor, deodorant. I noticed because my bottle of shampoo ran out in a week. I thought maybe my roommate was using it, but then I saw his wet towel on the floor and my razor sitting on the edge of the tub. I moved all my toiletries into my room. I carried them back and forth like I was at a summer camp. I brought it up to my roommate. I said, hey, your boyfriend keeps using my stuff. Can you ask him to stop or at least buy his own? She shrugged and said he probably didn't realize. I let it go, but it kept happening. He'd go into the bathroom when I was in the shower and take my razor. I'd find my deodorant in his bag. It was creepy. Finally, I sat her down and told her straight up, I'm not comfortable with him showering here all the time. He doesn't live here, he doesn't contribute, and he uses my stuff. If he at least bought his own, I'd feel different. She got defensive. She said I was being controlling, that he had nowhere else to go, that his apartment didn't have hot water. I said, that's not my problem. Things got tense after that. He started giving me dirty looks in the hallway. My roommate stopped talking to me except to complain about the electricity bill. I started locking my bedroom door. Then one night I came home early from work and found him in the living room with a plastic baggie full of white powder. He tried to hide it, but I saw it. I didn't say anything. I went to my room and called the landlord the next morning. I explained the situation, the boyfriend living there using my stuff, and now I suspected drugs. The landlord said he'd handle it. That weekend, my roommate and her boyfriend were both gone. The landlord changed the locks and told me she'd been evicted. Apparently, he'd gotten complaints from other tenants too. I found out later from a mutual friend that the boyfriend had been dealing. That's why he was always at our place. He'd been kicked out of his own apartment. My roommate moved in with her parents. I got a new roommate after that, a quiet guy who pays half the rent and keeps to himself, and I started keeping my shampoo in my room just in case. I thought about calling the police that night, but I didn't. I just locked my door, pushed my dresser against it, and sat on my bed shaking. I kept thinking, what if he'd come into my room? What if I'd walked in on something worse? I texted my landlord at 6 a.m. the next morning, told him everything. The boyfriend living there full-time, the stolen toiletries, the powder I saw. He said he'd come by that afternoon. I called in sick to work and stayed in my room until I heard his knock. When the landlord came, my roommate wasn't there. The boyfriend was gone too. I let him in and showed him the bathroom, the living room. He found a little baggie behind the couch. He just shook his head and said, I'll handle this. And he did. By that evening, there was a new lock on the front door and a note taped to my door saying my roommate had been served an eviction notice. I didn't even feel bad. I just felt relieved. A few days later, a mutual friend reached out and told me the boyfriend had been dealing. That's why he was always at our place. He'd been kicked out of his own apartment months ago and had nowhere else to go. My roommate defended him the whole time. She said I was being controlling, that I was jealous of their relationship. She posted something on social media about how I'd ruined their lives. But I saw her a few weeks later at a coffee shop. She was alone. She looked tired. She didn't look at me. I didn't say anything either. I just paid for my latte and left. After that, I found a new roommate through a friend of a friend, a quiet guy in his late 20s who works night shifts. He's barely around, pays half the rent on time every month, and I've never once found his stuff in my shower. It's peaceful. I keep my shampoo in my room anyway, old habits. But that whole experience made me realize how quickly things can go sideways. You think you know someone, you think you're being reasonable, and then suddenly you're barricading your bedroom door because your roommate's boyfriend might be cooking meth in the living room. I still don't know what kind of drugs he had. I don't want to know. I'm just glad I got out before things got worse. It makes me think about all the times I ignored red flags. With Peter, with my boss, with that roommate. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic, that I should just be nice and accommodate people. But every single time, accommodating people just made them take more. I ended up paying for my own shampoo while a stranger used my razor. I ended up getting demoted while a man who slept at his desk got promoted. I ended up watching my husband undress with his ex-wife at our son's birthday party. I'm not doing that anymore. I don't care if it makes me the bad guy. I'd rather be the villain of someone else's story than the doormat of my own, and that's exactly what happened with my husband. Peter and I met when I was 21 and he was 31. I know, big age gap, but he was charming, established, and he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. We dated for 3 years, got married when I was 24. A year after the wedding, we adopted our son, Jack. He was 7 at the time, and I loved him the moment I saw him. I still do. He's my kid, full stop. Peter's family never accepted me. They're homophobic, and they never forgave him for leaving his ex-wife, Allison. Every family dinner, his mother would bring her up. She'd say things like, "Allison was such a good wife," or "You two were so happy together." Peter would just sit there and take it. He never defended me. I told myself it was because he didn't want to cause a scene. I told myself a lot of things back then. Jack's 8th birthday was at Peter's hometown, about 3 hours from where we lived. We rented a party hall in the community center. Balloons, cake, the whole thing. I was setting up the table when Peter's mother walked in with Allison. She just appeared like she'd been invited. I looked at Peter. He looked at his shoes. I asked him later if he knew she was coming, and he said no, but I could see it in his face. He knew. He just didn't stop it. I didn't want to ruin Jack's birthday, so I smiled. I thanked Allison for coming, and I spent the whole party with Jack and his cousins. We played tag, we did the pinata, I helped him open presents. It was a good day. For him, anyway. Around the time of the cake, I noticed Peter and Allison were gone. I asked his sister if she'd seen them. She just shrugged. I walked through the party hall, then out into the hallway, then toward the back rooms where the storage closets were. I heard a sound. I followed it. I found them in a small storage room, half undressed. Peter's shirt was off. Allison was unbuttoning her blouse. He had his hands on her waist. They froze when they saw me. I just stood there for a second, then I turned around and walked back to the party. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just went back, cut the cake, and sang happy birthday to my son. I smiled for every photo. I hugged Jack and told him I loved him. I waited until all the guests had left, including Allison, before I let Peter corner me in the parking lot. He said, "You really shouldn't have cut the cake without me. That was disrespectful." I looked at him and said, "I'm sorry, I just thought you'd be too busy getting into your ex-wife's pants." He went pale. He started stammering, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that she'd kissed him, that he was just confused, that he still loved me. I didn't answer. I picked Jack up, put him in the car, and drove to the hotel we were staying at. I booked a room for myself and Jack. I called my sister and told her everything. She said, "Come home now." So the next morning I packed our bags, took Jack for pancakes, and drove back to our city. I didn't tell Peter where I was going. He called me maybe 40 times that day. I let each one go to voicemail. When I finally answered, it was to say, "I'm filing for divorce." He cried, he begged. He sent me flowers. He showed up at my sister's apartment with a handwritten letter saying he'd made a mistake, that he was going to get therapy, that he'd cut off his family. I read the letter and I thought about all the times I'd ignored the red flags. The way he never defended me to his mother. The way he'd talk about Allison with this softness in his voice. The way he'd disappear at family events. I didn't answer. I hired a lawyer. I filed for divorce on grounds of adultery. Peter tried to fight it, but I had witnesses. His sister saw them in that storage room too. She told me later she'd been looking for the bathroom and saw them through a crack in the door. The divorce went through 3 months later. I got the apartment. I got Jack. Peter got visitation rights, but I made sure they were supervised until a psychologist cleared him. Jack still asks about him sometimes. I tell him the truth in kid terms. Daddy made some bad choices and we need to take a break from him for a while. Jack is 9 now. He's in 3rd grade. He plays soccer and he's terrible at math, but he tries so hard. I'm seeing a therapist. I'm learning to stop ignoring the red flags. I'm teaching Jack that he deserves to be treated with respect, and that love doesn't mean accepting being pushed aside. Peter's mother still sends me angry texts. She calls me a homewrecker, says I destroyed her son's life. I block each number. I've changed my number twice. I don't care anymore. I'm not the doormat I used to be, and I'm never going back, but the universe apparently wasn't done testing me. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I got hit with something at work that made me question whether I was living under some kind of cosmic joke. I work for a mid-sized tech company. I've been there for almost 8 years now. I started as a junior project manager, worked my way up to senior, and for a while I thought I was on a solid track. But then the CEO, let's call him Dick because that's what he is, started playing favorites. And his favorite was this guy named Bob. Bob joined the company about 3 years ago. He was competent enough, nothing spectacular, but he had this way of schmoozing that made Dick eat out of his hand. When Bob and his wife had a baby, she became a stay-at-home mom, and Dick thought that was just the most admirable thing in the world. He'd talk about it in meetings. "Bob's a real family man," he'd say. "That's the kind of character we need here." Meanwhile, I was getting silently demoted for having a baby of my own. No raise in 4 years, no promotion. My responsibilities got quietly shifted to other people. When I asked my direct supervisor about it, she just shrugged and said Dick had made the call. No explanation, nothing. Bob, on the other hand, was showing up later and later to the office. Sometimes he'd come in at 11, nap at his desk, and leave by 3. But Dick kept promoting him, first to my level, then above me. About a year ago, Bob and his family had to move across the country for a family emergency. Dick gave him another promotion. When they settled, Bob was suddenly in a position where he outranked me, so imagine my surprise when I got a text from him in early December. I was sitting in my home office trying to finish a report before my son came back from school and my phone buzzed. It was Bob. "Hey, I know this is last minute, but we're coming to town for a conference in January. My wife, toddler, and dog need a place to stay for the week. Can you host them?" I stared at the message for a solid 30 seconds. Then I read it again. I thought maybe I was misreading it, but no, there it was. He was asking me to house his entire family for a week, and as an afterthought, he added, "Or if that doesn't work, I guess I'll ask the company to pay for my accommodations." Let me tell you something about that company. They nickel and dime everyone except the Golden Boys. I hadn't gotten a paid training in 4 years. I hadn't gotten so much as a coffee mug for Employee Appreciation Day, and this guy was acting like I was his personal hotel service. I didn't answer the text. I took a screenshot and forwarded it to my best friend. She responded with a row of skull emojis and said, "Please tell me you're not actually considering this." I wasn't, but I also knew Bob would run to Dick if I said no, so I had to be careful. The next morning I had a meeting with Dick. I walked into his office and sure enough, before I could even sit down, he said, "Bob mentioned he reached out about staying at your place. That's really generous of you to offer." I blinked. I didn't offer. He asked. I haven't responded. Dick leaned back in his chair and gave me this look like I was being difficult for no reason. "Come on, it's just a week. You have the space, don't you?" I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. My son had the second room. There was no guest room. There was no space for a toddler and a dog. I told him that. Dick waved his hand. "You can figure it out. Bob's doing important work for this company. The least you can do is help him out." I wanted to say so many things. I wanted to scream about how Bob had been promoted 3 times in 2 years while I was stuck in the same position, about how I hadn't had a raise since before my kid was born, about how I was tired of being treated like the company's mother while Bob got to be the golden child. But I didn't. I just said, "I'll think about it." That afternoon, I went back to my desk and typed up an email to HR. I listed every discrepancy I could document. Bob's late arrivals, his missed meetings, his sleeping at his desk, his promotions that came out of nowhere while I and others were passed over. I attached screenshots of his text to me. I sent it. HR called me the next day. They said they'd look into it. I didn't hear anything back for 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Bob texted me again, this time with a smiley face. "Hey, just checking in. Dick said you'd be good for the week. Let me know your address." I didn't respond. On Christmas Eve, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Bob's wife. She was crying. She said she was so sorry to bother me, but they were stranded. Bob had forgotten to book a hotel for their trip and they didn't have anywhere to stay. She asked if I could please just let them crash for 2 nights. She said she'd sleep on the floor if she had to. I felt terrible for her. But I also knew that if I said yes, Bob would never stop expecting it. So I told her I was sorry, but I didn't have room. She said she understood. She sounded defeated. I almost caved, but I didn't. The next week I found out HR had done nothing. They told me it was a personal matter and didn't fall under their jurisdiction. I went back to Dick and told him directly that I couldn't host Bob's family. Dick looked at me like I'd just kicked a puppy. "This is the kind of thing that reflects poorly on you," he said. "Team players don't say no." I started looking for a new job that night. It took me 4 months. 4 months of interviews, rejections, and one panic attack in my car before a second-round interview, but I got an offer. It was 20% less pay, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. I put in my 2 weeks' notice. Dick called me into his office and said he was disappointed. He said I was making a mistake. He said Bob was going places and I was throwing away my future. I smiled, thanked him for the opportunity, and walked out. On my last day, Bob came by my desk. He didn't even say goodbye. He just asked, "So are you still not able to host my family?" I laughed. I couldn't help it. "Bob," I said, "I don't work here anymore. You're going to have to figure it out yourself." He looked genuinely confused, like it had never occurred to him that I had a life outside of his needs. I packed my box, walked past Dick's office, and never looked back. That was 6 months ago. I'm at a smaller company now. They actually pay me on time. They don't ask me to host anyone's family. And when I had to take a day off because my son was sick, my boss just said, "Take care of him. We'll cover your work." I almost cried in that meeting, but I didn't, because I'm done crying over people who don't deserve my tears. And speaking of people who don't deserve anything from me, let me tell you about my old roommate. The one with the boyfriend who wouldn't stop showering at our place. That story ended with me getting a new lock and an eviction notice, but there's more to it. After my roommate moved out, I thought the chapter was closed. I thought I'd never see her again. But about 3 months ago, I got a friend request on Facebook. It was her. I ignored it. Then a week later, she sent me a message through a mutual friend. She wanted to apologize. I almost deleted the message without reading it. But curiosity got the better of me. She said she was sorry for how she'd treated me. She said the boyfriend had been arrested a few months after the eviction. He'd been dealing like the mutual friend suspected. He'd also been stealing from her. She found out because he tried to pawn her laptop. She said she felt stupid for defending him. She said she missed living with me. I didn't respond because here's the thing I've learned. People will ask for your forgiveness and sometimes they mean it. But that doesn't mean you have to give it. You don't have to be the bigger person. You don't have to be the one who fixes everything. You can just walk away. I thought about all the times I'd apologized to people who didn't deserve it. I apologized to Peter for overreacting to finding him with his ex-wife. I apologized to my boss for not wanting to host his coworker's family. I apologized to my roommate for being upset about a stranger using my razor. I was always the one saying sorry. I'm done with that. I'm not saying I've got it all figured out. I still have bad days. I still wake up some mornings and wonder if I could have done things differently. But I'm getting better at recognizing when someone is just taking advantage of me, and I'm getting better at saying no. Last week, my son asked me if I was ever going to date again. I told him I didn't know. He said, "That's okay, Mom. You don't need anyone. You've got me." He's 9. He's smarter than I'll ever be. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe I'll find someone who actually deserves me. Maybe I won't. But I know one thing for sure. I'm never going to be the person who lets someone use her shampoo and then apologizes for it. I'm never going to be the person who watches her husband cheat and then cuts the cake anyway. I'm never going to be the person who says yes to hosting someone's family just because her boss told her to. I'm just going to be me. And if that makes me the bad guy in someone else's story, so be it. I've got my son. I've got a job that doesn't make me cry in the parking lot. I've got a bathroom where only my shampoo sits on the ledge. That's enough. That's more than enough. I never thought I'd be the guy who gets cheated on at his own son's birthday party. But here we are. My name's Alex and I'm 27. I've been married to my husband Peter for 3 years. He's 37. We've been together for 6. He has an ex-wife, Allison, same age as him. They divorced a year before we met. Peter is bisexual. I never had a problem with that. I never had a problem with Allison either, not at first. She seemed fine. We were all adults. The problem was Peter's family. They're homophobic. Not the kind that screams slurs at you, the kind that smiles to your face and then whispers to Peter that he should go back to his wife. Every holiday, every gathering, it was the same song. "You're just confused, Peter. You'll come back to Allison eventually. It's a phase." My mother-in-law was the worst. She'd invite Allison to everything, pretending it was a coincidence. I let it slide. For 6 years, I let it slide because Peter said he loved me and he chose me. He said his family would come around. I believed him. We adopted a son, Jack. He's 7 now. I love him like he's my own blood because he is. He's mine. I was there for his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. Peter and I both adopted him legally. He calls me Dad. So when Jack's 7th birthday came around, we decided to have a party at Peter's parents' house. They live a few hours away, but they insisted. I knew it was a bad idea. I knew his mother would pull something. But Peter said, "It's Jack's birthday. Let's just do it for him." I agreed. The party was on a Saturday in September. We drove up Friday night and stayed at a hotel. Saturday morning, we went to his parents' house. The yard was decorated, there was a bounce house, and all the cousins were there. Jack was so happy. That's the only reason I didn't leave right away when I saw Allison walk through the front door an hour in. She walked in like she owned the place. My mother-in-law hugged her and said, "I'm so glad you could make it, sweetie." I looked at Peter. He looked down. He knew I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want Jack's birthday to be about me, so I swallowed it and walked over to where Jack was playing with his cousins. I spent the whole morning with him. We played tag. We did the bounce house. I took him to get his face painted. I thought if I just stayed busy, I could get through the party and we'd leave. But then it was time to cut the cake. I went to find Peter. I checked inside the house. The kitchen was empty. I checked the living room, empty. I heard a noise from upstairs. I thought maybe he was in the bathroom, so I went up. The door to his old bedroom was cracked open. I pushed it open. They were there, Peter and Allison, taking their clothes off fast like they couldn't wait. He had his shirt off. She was unbuttoning her jeans. They didn't see me. I stood there for maybe 5 seconds. Time just stopped. Then I turned around and walked back downstairs. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I went back to the yard, smiled at Jack, and helped him cut his cake. People sang happy birthday. I took pictures. I remember holding the knife and my hand was shaking, but I forced a smile. Jack didn't notice. He was too busy eating frosting. After the cake, people started leaving. I saw Peter and Allison come back down the stairs. Peter looked guilty. Allison looked smug. Peter came over to me and pulled me aside. "That was really disrespectful," he said. "You should have waited for me to cut the cake. I'm the father." I stared at him. I could smell her perfume on him. I could see a small hickey on his neck. I said, "I'm sorry. I just thought you'd be too busy getting into your ex-wife's pants." His face went white. He opened his mouth. I didn't let him speak. I walked over to Jack, picked him up, and told him we were leaving early because he looked tired. Jack said okay. We went to the hotel. I put Jack to bed. Then I sat on the bathroom floor for an hour. I texted my best friend. She called me. I cried into the phone. She said, "You need to leave him." I said, "I know." The next morning, I took Jack to breakfast. Peter called me 12 times. I didn't answer. He sent texts. I'm sorry. It was a mistake. She came on to me. I love you. I didn't respond. I packed our stuff and drove home. Jack asked why we were leaving early. I said, Daddy has to work. He seemed fine with that. He played his iPad the whole drive. That night, I called a divorce lawyer. She said I had a strong case. Peter had been unfaithful. We had an adoption together, but there was no blood relation, which made custody tricky. She said I might not get visitation unless Peter agreed. I started documenting everything, screenshots of his texts, times he came home late. The one time I found a receipt for a hotel, I kept it all. Peter showed up at our apartment a few days later. He was crying. He said he'd made a terrible mistake. He said Allison had been texting him for months and he was weak. He said he still loved me and wanted to work it out. I told him no. He said, what about Jack? You can't just take him away from me. I said, you took yourself away from him the second you chose her over us. He left crying. I didn't feel sorry for him. A week later, his mother called me. She said I was ruining the family. She said I was a phase. She said Allison was the real mother. I hung up on her. The divorce took 4 months. I got a small settlement. I didn't fight for much, I just wanted out. Peter agreed to let me have Jack on weekends, which was more than I expected. I think he felt guilty, or maybe he just wanted me gone so he could be with Allison. I found out later that Allison had been stalking me for months. She'd been showing up at my gym, at my grocery store. She even sent me a Facebook message saying I was a temporary distraction. I filed a restraining order. Peter tried to get back together twice. He came to my apartment with flowers. He cried on my doorstep. I told him to leave or I'd call the police. He finally stopped when I showed him the restraining order copy I had for Allison. He said, I'm sorry. I said, so am I? Jack asked about him sometimes. I tell him the truth. Daddy made a bad choice and we needed our own space. Jack is 7, so he accepts that. He still talks to Peter on the phone once a week. Peter doesn't come to visits anymore. I don't ask why. I moved to a smaller apartment. I got a new job. I started therapy. I learned that being with someone who lets their family disrespect you is not love, it's tolerance, and I was done being tolerated. I still think about that moment sometimes, standing in that doorway watching them. I think about how I walked back down to cut cake. I think about how I smiled for Jack. I didn't scream, I didn't break down, I just kept moving. That's what I do now, keep moving. And then there was the time I had to deal with my roommate's boyfriend using my razor. That one ended with a locked door and a lot of bleach. But that's a story for another day. Let me tell you about that one. My name's Sarah, I'm 21, and I lived in a 2-bedroom flat with a roommate I'll call Jenna. We were both 22 when we moved in together a little over a year ago. We split rent and bills evenly. We weren't best friends or anything, but we got along fine. She kept her space clean, I kept mine clean, and we both paid on time. That's all I needed. Then about 6 months ago, she started dating this guy. Let's call him Mark. He was 24, worked some kind of night shift job, always had cash in his pocket but never seemed to have a credit card. At first, he was around once or twice a week. That was fine, normal, but within a month he was sleeping over 5 or 6 nights a week. Sometimes full weeks straight. He wasn't on the lease. He didn't pay a cent toward rent or utilities. He didn't bring groceries. He didn't even buy toilet paper, nothing. I didn't say anything at first because I didn't want to start drama. I figured Jenna was in love and he was just mooching and eventually she'd get tired of it. But then the shower thing started. Mark showered every single day, twice a day minimum. Sometimes 3 times if he went to the gym, which he rarely did. And every time he showered, he used my stuff. My shampoo, my conditioner, my face wash, my razor, even my deodorant. I noticed because the bottles were always moved and the razor was wet when I hadn't used it. I thought maybe Jenna had let him borrow something once. I left my stuff in the bathroom anyway, but it kept happening. So I moved everything into my room and started carrying it back and forth every time I needed to shower, like I was at a campground. It was exhausting. I finally brought it up to Jenna in the kitchen one night. I said, hey, can you ask Mark to stop using my stuff? I'm carrying my toiletries in and out every day. She shrugged and said, he probably didn't realize. I'll talk to him. She didn't. The next day, my razor was wet again. A week later, I said something more direct. I told her I wasn't comfortable with him showering here constantly, especially since he didn't live here and didn't contribute anything. I said I'd feel different if he at least bought his own shampoo and left it in the bathroom. But he didn't. Jenna got defensive. She said I was being controlling. She said he had a gym membership and could shower there, but he preferred our place because the water pressure was better. I said, that's not my problem. She said, you're just jealous because you're single. I let that slide, but I started locking my door at night. A couple weeks later, I came home early from work, like 2 in the afternoon early. I walked in the door and heard the shower running. I figured it was Jenna, but then I heard a man's voice on the phone, Mark. He was talking loud over the water. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but our walls are thin. I heard him say, yeah, I got the stuff. Tell him I'll have it by tonight. Just keep it quiet. The roommate is a nosy bitch. My blood went cold. I quietly walked to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed. I started thinking about all the times he'd come in at weird hours, all the cash he had, the way he always answered his phone in the bathroom, the smell sometimes like something chemical when he came out of the shower. I started Googling signs someone is cooking or dealing. I called my brother who's a cop in another state. He said, get out of there now or at least call the police. I didn't call the police that night, I was scared. I texted Jenna, we need to talk when you get home. She came home at midnight, Mark wasn't with her. I told her what I heard, she laughed. She said, Mark sells a little weed to his friends, it's no big deal, you're overreacting. I said, he said the stuff, that's not just weed. She rolled her eyes, you're being dramatic. I said, he uses my razor, he uses my deodorant, he doesn't pay a single bill, and now I have to worry about cops raiding my apartment? She said, if you don't like it, you can move. That was it. I started looking for a new place the next morning, but I didn't have a lease break clause that was cheap, so I was stuck for 2 more months. I started documenting everything: dates, times, texts. I even took a photo of the wet razor with his hair in it. 3 days later, I came home and the front door was unlocked. That was weird. I walked in and saw the bathroom door wide open. Mark was standing there with a baggie in his hand. He saw me and shoved it in his pocket. He said, oh, hey. I said, what was that? He said, nothing. I said, I'm calling the cops. He said, do that and I'll tell them you're the one selling. I didn't call the cops. I went to my room, locked the door, and called Jenna. She didn't answer. I texted her, your boyfriend just threatened me. I'm calling the landlord tomorrow. She replied, stop being dramatic. The next morning, I called the landlord. I explained the situation. He said he couldn't do anything unless I had proof of illegal activity. I said I had a witness, my ears. He said that wasn't enough, so I decided to force the issue. I put a lock on my door that required a key from both sides. I also put a small camera in the hallway pointing at the bathroom door. I don't know if that was legal, but I was desperate. 2 days later, I got a text from an unknown number. Stop sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. I called the police. They came, talked to Jenna and Mark, found nothing because Mark had flushed everything. They left. Jenna was furious. She said I ruined her relationship. I said, he's a drug dealer. She said, he's my boyfriend and you're a paranoid bitch. That night I came home and my room had been broken into. My lock was busted, my clothes were thrown everywhere, and someone had poured bleach all over my bed. I didn't have to guess who. I called the police again. They took photos. They arrested Mark for breaking and entering. They also found a small bag of meth in his jacket pocket when they searched him. He went to jail. Jenna moved out a week later. She said I had ruined her life. I said she ruined her own life by dating a drug dealer who showers twice a day. She didn't think that was funny. I found a new roommate a month later, a quiet guy who works at a library. He pays half the rent and buys his own shampoo. I still lock my door sometimes. Old habits. That was the razor story. The bleach stain on my mattress didn't come out. I threw it away. Sometimes I think about how weird life is. You think you're dealing with a small thing, a razor, a shower, and then you end up in a police report. But at least I didn't end up like some people I've heard about, like my coworker Karen. She had a boss who asked her to host his entire family for a week. Can you believe that? Yeah, that was my roommate situation. But then there's Karen. She works at the same company I do, and her story made my bleach mattress drama look tame. She told me this one time when we were grabbing coffee after a terrible team meeting. I'll let her tell it. I'm 42, been at this company for 11 years. I started as an assistant and worked my way up to senior project manager. I've always been the reliable one. The one who stays late, covers for people, never complains, and I've been punished for it. Our CEO, let's call him Dick because he is one, has this golden boy named Bob. Bob started 3 years after me. He came in as a junior analyst, married his college sweetheart, and when she had a baby, Dick practically threw a parade. Bob was promoted, then promoted again. Meanwhile, I had a baby 2 years ago. You know what I got? A silent demotion. No announcement, no write-up. Just my responsibilities slowly stripped and given to a guy 10 years younger who couldn't find his own desk without GPS. And Bob, he started showing up later and later, missing meetings. When he was in the office, he was asleep at his desk. I saw him snoring once. But he was a family man, so Dick thought that was admirable. I was a mother, so I was obviously distracted and unreliable. Never mind that my project completion rate was higher than his. Never mind that I hadn't taken a sick day in 4 years. About a year ago, Bob and his family moved across the country for an emergency. Something about his wife's mom being sick. He got another promotion the week they settled. At that point, he went from being under me to being my equal. Then a couple months ago, he got promoted again. Now he outranks me. He's a senior vice president. I'm still a senior project manager, no raise in 4 years. So imagine my surprise when I'm sitting at my desk on a Tuesday morning and I get a text from Bob, not a phone call, a text. It says, hey, can you host my wife and toddler and dog for a week in January? We're coming into town for a conference and don't want to board the dog. Also, if that doesn't work, maybe you can ask the company to pay for our hotel. Let me know. I stared at my phone for a full minute. I thought it was a joke, but it was. He actually expected me to let his family stay at my house for a whole week, my 2-bedroom apartment with a toddler and a dog, and then he had the nerve to suggest I ask the company to pay for his accommodations if I said no, as if that was the reasonable alternative, not him booking his own hotel. I didn't answer. I took an aspirin and went to my meeting with Dick, and sure enough, Dick brought it up. He said Bob mentioned he reached out to you about hosting his family. I think it's a great idea. You have a spare room and it'll really help him out. He's under a lot of pressure lately. I said, Dick, I haven't had a raise in 4 years. I just got demoted for having a baby, and now you want me to host Bob's family for free. Dick got all red in the face. He said, this isn't about that. This is about being a team player. Bob is a valuable asset. I said, so am I. I've been here 11 years. When do I get to be a valuable asset? He said, you're being emotional. Why don't you take the afternoon off and think about it? I didn't take the afternoon off. I went back to my desk and sent Bob a one-word reply, no. He called me 5 minutes later. He said, what do you mean no? Dick said it was fine. I said, I mean no, I'm not hosting your family. I'm not your innkeeper. Figure out your own accommodations. He said, you're being unreasonable and unprofessional. I said, I'm being clear, and if you text me again about this, I'm going to HR. He hung up. I started getting cold shoulders from a few people. Bob had told everyone I was being difficult. A couple of his buddies stopped making eye contact with me in the break room. I went to HR 2 days later. I explained everything, the text, the meeting with Dick, the demotion, the lack of raises. The HR lady nodded and took notes. She said she'd look into it. I haven't heard back. That was 3 weeks ago. Yesterday, Bob emailed me a calendar invite for a collaboration session next month. The subject line said family visit planning. I declined it. He emailed me again asking why. I didn't reply. I'm sending out resumes tonight. 11 years and I'm the bad guy for saying no. That's where I'm at. I told Corinne she was right to say no. She said she knows. But she also knows the company is never going to change. She's hoping to be out by February. That story got me thinking about how many people just expect you to bend over backward for them. And then there's the ones who go way further than just asking for a favor. They actually betray you, like my friend Michael. He's 27, married to a guy named Peter, 37. They adopted a son, Jack, who was 7 at the time. Peter had an ex-wife, Allison, 37. They divorced a year before Michael and Peter started dating. Peter was bisexual, which Michael never had a problem with. But Peter's family, they were homophobic. They always told Peter he should get back together with Allison. They never accepted Michael. For Jack's 7th birthday, they drove 3 hours to Peter's hometown. The plan was to have a small party at his mom's house, just family. Michael was nervous because of the homophobia, but Peter promised it would be fine. The party started okay. Jack was happy playing with his cousins. Michael was helping cut the cake when his mother-in-law said, oh, by the way, I invited Allison. She should be here any minute. Michael froze. He said, you invited his ex-wife. My son's birthday party, she said. She's still family and Jack loves her. Before Michael could argue, Allison walked in with a gift. Michael didn't want to ruin Jack's day, so he kept quiet. He spent the next hour playing with Jack and the other kids, pretending everything was normal. Then it was time for cake. Michael looked around for Peter and Allison. They weren't in the living room. He checked the kitchen, not there. He walked down the hall and saw Peter's old bedroom door was cracked open. He pushed it open. Peter and Allison were half undressed. Peter had his shirt off. Allison was unbuckling his belt. Michael stood there for maybe 3 seconds. He didn't scream, he didn't cry, he just turned around, walked back to the party and served cake. He smiled and sang happy birthday and helped Jack open presents. People started leaving, and that's when Peter and Allison came out of the bedroom. Peter pulled Michael aside and said, you shouldn't have cut the cake without me. That was disrespectful. Michael looked at him and said, I'm sorry, I just thought you'd be too busy getting into your ex-wife's pants. Peter went pale. Michael took Jack and left. He drove to the hotel, put Jack to bed, and then sat on the bathroom floor and cried. The next morning, Peter called. He said he was sorry that Allison had initiated it, that his mom had pressured him. Michael said, you're a grown man, you made a choice. Peter said, can we talk about this in person? Michael said, when you leave the house of the woman who set this up and when you cut off your family for a month, then we'll talk. Peter didn't do that. He kept saying his family was just trying to protect him. Michael filed for divorce a week later. He got full custody of Jack because Peter was too much of a mess to fight it. Last I heard, Peter was living with his mom again. Allison moved in next door. Michael and Jack are doing okay. They started going to therapy. Michael said the best part was when Jack asked, is Daddy Peter going to be okay? And Michael said, that's not our job to worry about anymore. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you just don't. And the only thing you can do is walk away.